which we'll talk about.
Yes.
All righty, looks like we're going to get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Linda, and it looks like we have people calling from all over the world today to get involved, and we couldn't be more honored to have you here. So thank you for being here. As you get situated, I would like to go over a few things so you know how to participate in today's discussion. And if you have questions or comments during the chat, during today's discussion panel, you can insert them in the chat box below. And to Greenpeace staff, Caitlin and Melanie, you're going to be seeing their names in the chat. We'll be able to respond to your questions. So for now, get comfortable, like I said before, and familiar with the chat box, and we'll get started. If we can go to the next slide. When you go to the chat box, make sure you click everyone so everyone can see your discussion, your conversation, your questions, and we can all be part of the dialogue. Awesome. So for today's agenda, we're going to do a welcome, do introductions of everyone here. We'll have a film summary, questions that supporters that watched the film shared with us before this call. We'll have a run-through of questions that are coming in live from Facebook. Hi, Facebook. From people here in the lab, the chat here in Zoom. And we'll be sharing, connecting on the work that we're all doing. We're going to hear from Tejas and the Ecology Center in Berkeley. And then we're going to be taking action together. So make sure you say hello, your name, where you're from in the chat. I would love to hear from you. So for the goals for today, we have 3 things that we want to point out. We want to know a shared understanding of plastic production and the opportunities leaving the discussion, knowing how the plastic industry contributes to climate change and has adverse human health impacts. The do is when we're going to take action together by the end of this discussion. In the feel, we found this really cool quote by motivational quote by Cesar Chavez. History will judge societies and governments and their institutions not by how big they are or how well they serve the rich and powerful, but how effectively they respond to the needs of the poor and helpless. Next slide. Awesome. Now we'll pass it on to Annie and Bonnie to introduce themselves.
Thank you so much, Linda, and welcome everybody. My name is Annie Leonard, and I'm really honored to be the executive director of Greenpeace, an organization so dear to my heart that I started working with in 1988, actually. And I'm also on the board of the Story of Stuff project that created the incredible film that many of you just saw, The Story of Plastic. So thank you so much for joining us today and talking about such an important issue. And I also want to hand it over to my colleague and friend, Bonnie Wright, to introduce herself.
Thanks, Annie. Thank you everyone for joining today. It's so exciting to see that people are so ready and willing to learn more about the hugely complex issue as plastic pollution. I've been working with Greenpeace for 2 or nearly 3 years as an ambassador for the oceans and have just seen so much firsthand pollution, but also solutions to this and what we can be doing together. So I'm excited that we can come together and share those solutions. And I'll pass it over to our speakers.
So Yvette, Martin, and Kate, could each of you please introduce yourselves to our audience?
I'll go. I'm Martin Bork. I'm the executive director at the Ecology Center in Berkeley, California. We've been working on, we do the curbside recycling for the city of Berkeley and started that program in 1973. It was the first curbside recycling program in the country. Featured prominently in the film, we've been working on plastics and plastic reduction and challenging false plastic narratives, really since plastic packaging became prominent in the 80s and 90s.
Yvette? Is Yvette there? Are you on mute?
Looks like Yvette's not here yet, so we'll move on to Kate.
Great.
Hey everybody, my name is Kate Melgis. It's so nice to be here today. Thanks everyone for joining. I am a senior ocean plastics campaigner for Greenpeace, and I'm based in Seattle, Washington. Thanks so much for being here, and really excited to have this conversation.
Back to you, Bonnie.
Looks like you're muted, Bonnie.
Apologies. Okay, yeah, thank you for your introduction. I think when Yvette joins, we'll also hear from her and her story. I wanted to ask the participants of everyone joining if they've watched the film, and as I understand, a poll will come up and you can let us know if you've watched The Story of Plastic.
There's no option for 4 times. That's what I would have, that's what I would have clicked. Has everyone taken the poll?
Yes.
Is everyone taking the poll? Yeah. How do
Yes.
we, what's the?
I will read it for you.
Okay.
Yeah, can you see it?
Yeah, I can see it. So 37% of people have watched it. 20% of people haven't, and 42% I'm planning on watching it soon, which is great to hear. I feel like I thought I knew a lot about plastics, but watching this film just made me realize how much more there was to learn and know, and how many things are connected, which is obviously what we're going to talk about today. So I'll let Annie continue.
Thanks. So I'm going to ask first, Martin, do you want to give a quick summary of the film, since a number of people haven't watched it yet? Although don't give it all away, because we still want them to watch it because it is such an incredible film, but just give a quick overview of what the film is. I'm asking Martin because he's one of the stars of it.
Yeah, so I first got connected with this film through Break Free from Plastic movement. I was at an international gathering in Indonesia. It was the second meeting of the Break Free from Plastic movement leadership, about 100 people. And all the stories in the room, it was people from around the globe and this that you see in the film. And the stories from around the room were so compelling and so interconnected. And yet, until that moment, I hadn't really seen the pipeline people and the fracking people in the same room with the oceans people and the garbage dumping folks in Southeast Asia, and all in the same room together. And Steve Wilson, the executive producer, was there. And I think they had already pretty much gotten a go-ahead or started the film, but that was really my introduction. And they came to interview us. And we've, as a sort of middle player in this, long chain of reactions that happens from the pipeline to disposal, we felt like a real interconnector in this story. And I think that comes across in the film. The film does so well and so brilliantly is to really show how all of these things are one system and are interconnected, and the impacts on, say, turtles, and that video of the straw up the turtle's nose is so connected to the battles happening for people in Pennsylvania trying to fight pipelines, or people in Houston trying to fight petrochemical pollution, or people in Indonesia trying to fight plastic dumping in their front yard, literally, and does it in a way that really honors people's stories and allows them to tell it from the first person, and really takes a global perspective that is not so US centric as lots of other documentaries I've seen are. Really, and I think that's what makes it such a powerful film, is that it allows people to tell their story. And it's just, the information, once you put it all together, is just incredibly compelling and very powerful. It is both shocking and horrifying, but it is also very empowering. And together, we've been able to make so much movement in this field in a very short period of time because of the coordinated efforts of Break Free from Plastic and being able to link these stories together.
Thank you. I agree that the system of the film is, the system of plastic that is exposed in the film is one of the sort of great insights. I was there with Martin and Yvette and a number of others when it premiered at the Marin Film Festival. And when I asked people who are newer to the plastic issue, what were the biggest takeaways, or what did they think differently about plastic, the two things that they said was understanding that it was a system, like Martin said. The plastic industry has been so successful at getting us to think plastic is a litter problem, plastic is a waste problem, plastic is an ocean pollution problem, and it is all of those things for sure. But plastic is also an oil and gas drilling and fracking problem. It's a environmental health and environmental justice problem where it's made. The whole life cycle of plastic is a problem, not just the end. And the film is phenomenal at waking us up to that whole cycle. The other thing that the film is so good at is showing how intentional it was by the fossil fuel and petrochemical industries to permeate our lives with plastic. It didn't just happen that all of a sudden there's plastic everywhere. It is not because, quote, consumers are demanding it, which is what these companies love to say, that it's our fault. It is because the fossil fuel and petrochemical industries want to keep drilling oil and gas. They want to keep making plastic. And if we all rise up, as we are doing right now, and saying we want less plastic, that's a threat to their bottom line. And so they are committed to growing plastic. And we'll talk more about that. But it's important to understand that plastic is a whole system problem, and the petrochemical industry is pushing it out into the environment so much. And that's why we often use this metaphor of the flowing bathtub. When it comes to plastic pollution, so many people ask us, how can we clean up the ocean? You know, isn't it great that I can recycle more? All of this stuff at the end of plastic's life. And the metaphor that helps us understand why that is not good enough is if you'd been on vacation and your bathtub had been left on and the plug was in, and you come home and your whole bathroom is overflowed with water and it's running down the stairs and your beautiful carpets are being soaked with water and there's water everywhere, what is the first thing that you do? Do you get a sponge or mop and start cleaning up the living room, or do you go turn off the tap? And that's what we need to do with plastic, because we can never mop and clean and soak it up as fast as it is coming at us. So that's one of the great insights from this film, looking at the whole cycle and realizing we have to go to the source and reduce single-use plastic at the source. We are never going to be able to clean our way or recycle our way out of this. So I would love to hear from folks that are watching. Were you aware of the connection between plastic and the fossil fuel industry? Is that new to you? You know, when you hold a Coke bottle or something, which I don't know why you would ever hold a Coke bottle unless you were picking it up out of the gutter. But if you were to hold a Coke bottle and you look at that plastic, it's hard to realize that that is fossil fuels. You know, that plastics are almost entirely made from oil and gas, which is, it seems weird because it doesn't feel like oil and gas. So a lot of people don't realize that connection. So if you could just take this poll, how aware were you of the connection between plastic and the fossil fuel industry, and that plastic is made of fossil fuels, and that the fossil fuel industry is pushing to increase plastic? If you could take that poll, then we'll get a sense of our community here. Are you doing it? Oh, it's waiting because I haven't done it. What do we got, Linda? Oh, good. A lot of people understand it. If you didn't understand it, then watch the Story of Plastic film, which lays it out really, really well. And when we follow up with information, we can share some more wonderful research that some of our allies have done around the connection between fossil fuels and plastics. And if Yvette does join us, she is living in the middle of that connection. So then she can tell us more. All right, let's go to questions from the audience. The first question here, oh, I wish Yvette was here to answer this. Is she here yet? Otherwise, I will do it because I've learned so much from her. The first question is about, can we describe the impacts of the plastic industry on communities from the ones where the plastic is made to the other side of the world? So this is I'm so glad whoever asked this question, I'm so glad for this, thank you. Because so often we think of plastic as a pollution problem, a problem for turtles, which it's true, that is definitely true, but it's also a problem for human health and for communities. And all along the life cycle of plastic, communities are paying the cost of plastics with their health. They're getting asthma, they're getting cancer, they're getting reproductive disorders. It is absolutely horrible. And you see that where the fossil fuels are extracted out of the ground and communities live there and are being polluted. The fossil fuels are then transported to communities where the petrochemical facilities are, where hazardous chemicals are mixed into it and they're turned into plastic. And there's people who live there and work there, and they're bearing the brunt of our plastic. So when we are unnecessarily using single-use plastic, we need to think about who are the people paying the price for that. And then when we're done with the plastic and we throw it away, often it's shipped to either other countries or to communities that are denied the same level of environmental health and protection that we all should be allowed. And so what happens from the production to the extraction, to the production, to the use, to the disposal, all of that disproportionately harms low-income communities, communities of color. And that's why we say that plastic is not just an environmental problem, it is a public health problem, and it is a racial and social justice problem, because we are not paying the price of plastic equally. And if Yvette is able to join us later, she works at a wonderful organization in Texas that works with the communities living right next to these facilities, and that the health impacts are infuriating when you hear her tell the stories about it. So yes, plastic, and you know what else? The plastic industry is not paying for those costs. They're what we call externalizing those costs. And that's why plastic seems so cheap, because the people that are really paying the costs of plastic are the people who are getting sick from it, are the people who are getting their waters polluted from it, their air polluted from it. So it's really important to think about that when we think of the whole cycle of plastic. Right, over to you, Bonnie, for the next one.
Yeah, thank you. So the next question is for Martin, and it is, what is the difference, which this is a question I'm asked a lot, is what is the difference between recycling materials like paper, metal, and glass, and how that really differs from plastic?
Yeah, it's a great, important question right now. Recycling industry is in a financial crisis, even before the pandemic. There's real difference between the kinds of materials that you collect for recycling. People should recall that recycling is an age-old activity. You know, it goes back centuries or eons, and that some of the largest recycling industries that we have in the country and internationally are steel and cardboard. Some of the most successful recycling programs, meaning capturing the most of those materials and actually recycling them, happen to be car batteries. So they're not necessarily what we think of when we think of our curbside recycling bin, or our residential recycling bin, or recycling at home, or recycling at an event or something. We see so much plastic has been pushed into the recycling bin by the chemical companies, by the plastic industry, that we now think of recycling as plastic recycling. And there are real difficulties with plastic recycling. Most of the things, you know, the thousands and thousands of plastic objects, particularly plastic packaging and foodware in particular, are not recyclable. There are not markets for those things. And the reasons are that they're very complicated. They have many different types of additives in them. They have different colors. They're sometimes printed or made in different ways that have different properties. So when you mix them all together, it's hard to make anything consistent out of them, unlike something like glass or aluminum or tin or paper or cardboard, where you can easily make those things back into new products. So recycling is still an incredibly important activity. We've been spending the last 40, 50 years building that infrastructure up in the US and around the globe. And we really need that infrastructure. You know, we can't continue to gobble up boreal forests and tropical forests to make Amazon boxes. And, you know, in that world as well, we also need to reduce our use. It is a hierarchy that goes reduce, reuse, and then recycle. But the plastic industry in particular has really sidestepped the reduce and reuse and really driven home this recycle message, and continues to double down on that, bringing forward increasingly problematic and false recycling solutions for their plastic products. So we constantly, in the recycling industry, we're constantly pushing back against new products that they want to call recyclable, which in fact are not. And I'll just give one example, which would be those little K-pod, you know, the coffee cups, the Keurig pods for single-use disposable coffee making. And we understand the convenience of it, but don't turn around and try and say that your pod is now recyclable, because number one, it's too small to really sort easily. It gets lost in all the machinery. Second, it's got a foil lid on it. So somebody's got to take the foil off and do something with it. And third, it's full of coffee. So that's not going to work in our recycling program. So who's really pulling the lid off, shaking out the coffee into their compost bin, and then recycling this little cup? So, you know, the fact that technically it might be a recyclable type of plastic is completely independent from the systems surrounding it that actually make it marketable as a recycling product. And we deal with this constantly, whether it's Colgate and their new recyclable toothpaste tube. Great idea, great effort, but in the end, not going to help us recycle toothpaste tubes when all the rest of them aren't. And then, you know, it just adds to this sort of ongoing messaging that, oh, pods are recyclable, tubes are recyclable, you know, your berry containers recyclable, your keg cups recyclable, all that stuff's not recyclable. And the message that they're sending to everyone with those little chasing arrows is that all of it is recyclable. And that's what gums it up for the rest of the stuff that truly has a good destination, like cans and bottles, like paper and cardboard.
Thank you, Martin. That's so important, that all recycling is not created equal. Some is good, some is a problem. So that is so helpful. We'll get back to that more, but I want to just stop for a second to introduce Yvette, who I'm so thrilled was able to join us. Yvette, could you just take a moment to introduce yourself? We'll talk a little bit more about Tejas later, but just introduce yourself. And I actually answered a question yesterday that, shortly, a few minutes ago, that I was wishing you were here for. So if you want to add to it, we got a question from the audience about how plastic impacts communities. And since that is the core of your work, if you could just say a few minutes on that, that would be awesome. And welcome.
Thank you. Yvette Arellano in Houston, Texas, with Tejas. And the way that Houston impacts at least Frontline and Frontline communities is unseen, because it is largely through chemical toxics that enter the body, through the skin, through the lungs, and simply expose families that live right next to refineries, above ground storage tanks, pipelines, and frack wells. It puts their health in danger. So the issue with these toxics is that they're unseen. Unlike a plastic bottle or a plastic bag in the ocean or in the landfill, you can't quantify how many toxics have entered a human body. And when we're talking about vulnerable lives like children and pregnant or expecting mothers, that kind of harm is unseen and is generational, because these toxics carry not your own single life, but your children and your children's children. So it's really putting our families and our future at risk.
Thank you. And I saw an audience question where someone just said, how does the plastic industry get away with it? And one of the things you just said is the answer, because some of it is unseen. And so it's hard to quantify something that you can't see. And also, as we talked about before you came, it's disproportionately impacting low income and communities of color, which, as we all know, because of the systemic racism in our whole society, are not the ones that are most asked their opinion on new policies. They've been disproportionately impacted by the harm and disproportionately excluded from being a part of the solution. And so that's been allowing it to continue, which is why it's so great that Greenpeace and Break Free from Plastics and Tejas and the Ecology Center and all these organizations are coming together to say, enough, we're going to change this, and we're going to do it in a sustainable, healthy, and just way. Bonnie, I'm going to ask you a question. A number of people are asking the same thing. How can we engage local people who may not have been involved in environmental issues in addressing the root causes of plastic?
Well, I think I feel like for so many people, more and more the interconnectedness of everything is just becoming further and further highlighted, I think, particularly during the time we're in right now. So I think even if people weren't, originally kind of aware or interested in environmental issues, I think now we are all beginning to sort of realize that they affect our health. It's not just about this kind of far off landscape like an ocean and plastic ending up there. It is about, as we're saying, communities. It's about our health as well. So I think it's happening. I think like it's already happening and we're in the middle of it. I think finding other sort of like-minded people who could be in your local area, I think can really help. I find often it's such a huge global issue that can be really overwhelming and sometimes disempowering. But I think if you find people in your local area, whether that's a kind of a local chapter of Greenpeace, to kind of see what action you can be taking beyond your habit changes. I think we obviously all can look into things that we can be doing with our habits, but really until policy protects us, that can feel somehow, you know, quite difficult to keep going with until we feel like we're being protected. So I think realizing that, yes, you are for sure, you know, using your money wisely with how you're buying things and the habits and things you do. But I think it's us realizing we do have the right to speak up and say that we're not happy with industries like the plastic industry. So I think, yeah, I would say find local people, join things like we're all on right now, and just educate yourself. And that's definitely what I've done and what this film can do. I think there's just so much to learn and so many different sides of the story. Like, I know I'm just coming from my side of the story. I'd love to ask you a question back, Annie, which is leading on from this kind of thing, is how can we really affect the change in plastic use on a sort of wider, bigger level? I kind of touched on policy, but I'd love to know your opinion on that.
I see a lot of people are interested in that same question. You know, because plastic is such an all-pervasive problem, there are so many ways to get involved in making a difference. And sometimes people start with their individual life choices, you know, the way that they shop, carrying a reusable bag, avoiding single-use plastic, and that is fantastic. Definitely, we should all do that. But that is never, ever going to scale enough to really solve the problem, because the plastics industry is so powerful and is expanding so much. So I like to think there's two values for doing the avoiding plastic in your own life. One is that it brings into alignment our values and our concerns. Like, we all know plastic is a problem, and we'll know it even more after we all watch this film, because it explains it so well. But we know plastic is a problem, and so it feels yucky to participate in buying single-use plastic. So the more that we can weed it out of our own lives, the more we bring into alignment our values and our actions. And from that place, we can engage more for the bigger, bolder change. The other reason that I think it's important to reduce plastic in your life is it's a way to find a system flaw. It's almost like a metal detector that you're going on the beach. This is like a flaw detector in the system. Anywhere that it's hard to avoid single-use plastic, then you found a flaw in the system. The system should be designed so that a more sustainable approach is easier, cheaper, more readily available, but it's often not. So for example, if you want to go somewhere and there's no water, and the only choice is a bottled water, that's a design flaw. You could work with your community members to get reusable water filling stations, like we have in many places now in the California Bay Area. But the real change is when we come into policies and corporate practices, because the kinds of decisions that have the biggest impact is not our decision in the grocery store. It's the decisions made in the halls of Congress, in state legislatures, and in corporate boardrooms, where they're deciding what kind of plastic is allowed. I live in Berkeley with Martin, and I see some other Berkeley neighbors here, and we're a very environmentally aware community. And still, we did decades and decades of education about bring your own reusable bag to the grocery store, and still sometimes I would forget. I admit, sometimes I would leave the bag in the car at home, and I would forget. So then we finally got together and banned single-use plastic bags at the grocery store, and overnight they were gone. Overnight, it was like we couldn't have gotten that level of plastic reduction in decades and decades of education. And now it's like gross to take a plastic bag. You can still get paper bags, but now I see people, if they don't bring their reusable shopping bag, they like pull their shirts out with all their soup cans in it and carry it to the car, because we have overnight changed the cultural norms. So I'd say look for your own life, for sure, look for things to do, but it's more impactful to get together with friends and neighbors and classmates and coworkers and change the rules so that single-use plastic is not allowed. It's much more effective than just trying to nag everybody to not use it. I'm seeing another note from an audience member coming in. It says, can you tell me a little bit more about the connections with the petrochemical industry and the growth of the petrochemical industry? I love that question. That must be from a friend. So this is really important for folks to understand about the connections between fossil fuels and single-use plastic. So we all know, because of climate change, the largest driver of climate change is carbon dioxide emissions, CO2 emissions, and the largest source of that is burning fossil fuels. So the science is very, very clear that we need to reduce fossil fuels. It's super clear. And we're seeing great progress in that. Cars, electric vehicles are growing, wind and solar is growing. A number of states have now committed to sourcing 100% of their energy for their grids from renewable energy. Like, it's really exciting to seeing the growth in renewable energy. We're all excited, but there are some people who are not excited, and that's the fossil fuel corporations. They are panicking because they're seeing the growth in alternatives to fossil fuels, and they want to keep bringing the fossil fuels out of the ground. So they have to figure out where are we going to put this stuff. They want to make sure they still have a market for their oil and gas, even if the demands for it as energy are decreasing. So the petrochemical industry is investing billions and billions of dollars right now to expand single-use plastic. They are looking to build hundreds of new factories in the Gulf, or near where Yvette lives, near in the Gulf in Louisiana, in places that are already heavily polluted. They are literally spending money right now to build new facilities to make single-use plastic. And their goal is to triple the amount of single-use plastic, because that will secure them a continued market for oil and gas. And we must not allow that to happen. The fossil fuel industry needs to wind down, and we need to figure out how to do it in a responsible and just way that takes care of the workers who work there, that takes care of the fossil fuel dependent communities, so that we have a just transition. But there is no doubt, the science is so clear, the fossil fuel industry needs to wind down, not depend on single-use plastic as its lifeline. So I want to make sure folks really realize that, because everything that the fossil fuels industry is doing to try to stay alive is going to continue to affect the climate. It's going to continue to affect people's health, and they are banking on the growth of single-use plastic. So we're not going to solve the climate crisis if we don't solve the single-use plastic crisis, and we're not going to solve the single-use plastic crisis if we don't reduce fossil fuels. Sorry, that was long. I'm very passionate about this. I want to ask a question for Martin. Martin, it's so great to have Martin in our community, because Martin is rare in that he is both an anti-plastics activist and he actually runs a recycling program. And so a lot of us don't actually run a recycling program, so we can think about what works or what doesn't work, but he actually knows and has to deal with all this stuff that we put in our bins. So Martin said that Berkeley had the first curbside recycling program in the country. We're very proud of that. But for a long time, the recycling program, the curbside recycling program that Martin runs, refused to take plastic. And a lot of the public was angry. They wanted to recycle their plastic. He got a lot of heat for it. He's held fast and refused. He finally did have to capitulate and take it. But Martin, can you tell me, or tell everybody, why you refused to take plastic for so long, and why all plastic isn't recyclable? We always hear from people who want to recycle their plastic bags or their takeout food containers or their film. Why can't they do that?
Yeah, so I don't want to go back too far, but California used to have a refillable bottle program for all of its beverage bottles. And so you could bring a glass bottle back to a retailer and you get 10 cents. And when I was a kid, we'd collect up the bottles, and that was our penny candy money. The bottling industry wanted to scale up significantly so that they could have a more global reach and to be able to have greater bottling capacity. So they switched from glass to plastic. And in doing that, you can't easily collect those plastic bottles and refill them. There are some refillable plastic programs nationally, internationally. In Germany, there's one, but they're few and far between. And because glass weighs so much, there were benefits to switching to plastic bottles. In that, they switched from this circular refillable model to a linear model of produce the bottles, fill the bottles, and then quote unquote recycle them. Well, there were at that time very few markets for that recycling of bottles. And today, that is really the best it gets in plastics recycling is PET bottles. Those are the #1 bottles that you see the little #1 on them. Those are clear beverage bottles. And mostly they get made into something that's one step away from the landfill. So we call it downcycling. They get made into things like fiber fill for sleeping bags or furniture coverings or carpet, only because of significant consumer pressure on the bottling companies is there now starting to be some bottle-to-bottle recycling where old bottles get made back into new bottles. And it's very expensive to do that, to get it back to food grade recyclable plastic. The other type of plastic that is generally recyclable, has markets and destinations, is number 2 bottles. These are milk jugs and shampoo bottles and detergent jugs. You know, we call them bottles and jugs when we talk about them in the plastics world of recycling. Those jugs generally get made into plastic lumber. So decking, you know, the Forest Service and Parks and Rec and all those, you know, you see a lot of that park benches now and decking being made out of that plastic. Again, it's going to last some time. That's great. It's going to get some use, but eventually it's probably going to end up in the landfill. In the meantime, it may be shedding tiny bits of microplastic into our environment and spreading out in the world that way. All of the rest of the plastic, this is berry containers, food packaging, you know, that impossible to open clear plastic packaging you get in so many consumer products that seems unnecessary because inside that giant plastic thing, there's not a little box of what you actually wanted. You know, all that stuff is not recyclable. The plastic utensils, the takeout foodware, the cold iced tea cups. And for years, the plastic industry has been spending millions of dollars convincing people to take these plastics in their recycling program. So for many decades, and continuing to this day, they had this program called Collect All Plastics. And they went city by city convincing individual recycling companies and cities to add all of these plastics to the recycling bin with the argument that if you add it all and make it easy for people, the stuff that's actually recyclable, you'll get more of that. And that may have been true, but what it also produced was a huge volume of unrecyclable plastic that everyone thought was recyclable. And really what was happening with it for 2 decades was that it was getting exported to China primarily, where they would cherry pick out the very best stuff. The only, you know, they would go and try and get every possible thing they could. And still there would be mountains of plastic that was just not recyclable. I'm talking about plastic bags. I'm talking about pouches, I'm talking about chip, you know, all the flexible packaging. Now we're seeing a huge boom in pouches and flex pack. Stuff's totally unrecyclable. And so that stuff would just get dumped. And then, you know, the rains come and it gets washed into the river, or it would get burned. And sometimes it would just create a huge, massive pile. And then when it rains, all of the poison and toxics and plastic leachate and everything, food, everything that's in that then seeps into the water table. And it can totally contaminate the water table of people who live in the areas that were getting all of these international imports of plastic to their community. And then to make that pile smaller, somebody would light it on fire. And you get this huge billowing, you know, smoke of black toxic smoke that was giving people asthma and cancer. And so at some point, China just said, no, we're not going to take it, you know, anymore. And that was a total upended the plastic recycling industry. And since that started like really in 2013, 2014, but really hit in 17 and 18, 2018, 2019, and now 2019, last year, they really clamped down on it. That stuff just has no place to go. And so it's either going to places that have absolutely no infrastructure to handle it, like you see in the film in Indonesia, or it's going to incinerators like you saw in the film in India or in the US, or it's going to landfill. And I saw a question about, you know, how do we keep plastic out of landfill? Right now, for me, I'd much rather see this unrecyclable plastic in a US landfill where I at least know it's contained in one place and not being spread throughout the environment and not being burned and polluting our air and not contaminating our water, at least for the time being. So for me, as a recycler, as an ethical recycler, yes, we're going to collect the bottles and the jugs, and we're going to do our very best to recycle those at the highest level we can. The rest of that stuff, I would much rather see in a landfill in California than going out the Port of Oakland.
Thank you so much, Martin. So I just wanted to say again, thanks to everyone for joining in. We have an amazing 400 people right now watching across Zoom and Facebook, which is great. And I also understand that if people haven't seen the film Story of Plastic, it will be available to watch till this evening, I think. So I just wanted to finish this section before we go into some more live questions from everyone. That is, we've obviously spoken about all different actions we can take, from policy to not recycling, but reusing and using different sort of methods. But could we start with each of us giving what is one thing that we could leave for people as a takeaway from today that we could do, that could be a macro, micro scale. Could I start with Yvette? Would you mind answering that? Just a little takeaway that people could do after this call.
Great, thank you for that question. There are actually two bills that people can take some action on that I'd like to bring up. And the first one would be the Environmental Justice for All Act, HR 5986. HR 5986 would literally list out protections to environmental justice communities, including not turning off monitoring systems, especially during natural disasters or fugitive emissions. So proper monitoring, English, Spanish, just like translation for all communities, since we know that environmental justice communities are largely made up of people of color communities and immigrant communities. Also, this wonderful bill, the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, HR 5845 and Senate Bill 3268. So definitely look into the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, and it hits all parts of the value chain. That's what's so wonderful about it, even calling for a temporary pause on frac sites that are largely located in our Gulf Coast. If I were to ask, just like personally, I would tell people, hit the different parts of the value chain. If you're looking at extraction, have that conversation with a friend, how 99% of all plastics are derived from fossil fuels. If you want to go into the production and reject corporate bailouts for big oil, for consumption, use less. Like, there's no need to consistently be ordering off of Amazon and Grubhub. We know how to do some basic things for ourselves. For corporate accountability, definitely calling out these big guys. Take a part in a personal brand audit and submit your results while you're at home, just on things that you use. And as part of waste, reuse and reduce. So we can reuse so many things in our household. We know how to do it best. When hard times hit like these, this is a perfect time to be innovative. And with oceans, just have conversations and get involved in the waste trade cycle so that we stop exporting this plastics problem to countries that don't have the infrastructure, like what Martin's highlighted.
Great. And Kate, do you have anything you'd love to inspire people as a takeaway from after this call?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I would say definitely what Yvette mentioned, please contact your congresspeople and ask them to support the various pieces of legislation. And then it's time to call out corporations and tell them to stop making so much plastic. Like Annie said, we have to turn off the tap. There's no way we're going to be able to clean it all out of the environment, and we must stop making so much plastic. So tell Nestle, tell Coke, Pepsi, Unilever, Target, Walmart, Kroger, all the stores and brands that you purchase from or that are around, to stop making so much plastic and to switch to systems of reuse and refill. And that is something I would love for everyone to do, just forever, moving on until we can get these companies to stop making so much plastic. Thanks.
Yeah, I would reiterate both of those things. Contact your federal, this is the first time we have any federal action on recycling and waste, and certainly first time we see anything as comprehensive as the Break Free from Plastic Act, which goes from the wellhead all the way to export. Let your Congress people know that you support the Break Free from Plastic Act and that you want to see that push forward. There's also local stuff. In Berkeley, we just passed the Single-Use Disposable Foodware Reduction Act, an ordinance to reduce disposable foodware at the local level. Cities can lead on these issues. And while we know we're not going to have a lot of national leadership coming from this administration, and we're facing all kinds of setbacks with the EPA, we can take action at the local level, and cities can provide a lot of leadership on this. So whether it's getting a plastic bag reduction ordinance, or banning polystyrene foodware, or getting a foodware reduction ordinance passed in your community. That's something that you can do in your community wherever you are on the planet. And I would encourage you to really focus on your municipal level government and maybe state or provincial level government as well. I do think corporations are particularly sensitive right now. They know they have a big weakness and a big exposure. Hit them up on Twitter, man. They're touchy about this. So just hammer them. And, the Break Free from Plastic movement has been great at this. These corporate brand audits have really highlighted who the big polluters are, and there's nowhere for them to hide. And the more we can just keep bringing that up and exposing them and bringing it up, it turns into a bottom line issue for them that their shareholders then eventually have to take action on. So we actually see commitments being made, and some of them are a lot of hot air and they're kind of lofty, but some of them are going to stick. And when those companies actually start buying some of their own packaging as a true sort of circular economy recycling world, then you'll see prices for this recycled plastic go up that actually make the recycling of plastic work better. So keep the pressure on them.
That's great. Thank you for your suggestions. And just a reminder, they've been coming up in chat, but if you do text Congress to 877-877, Greenpeace will send you a message back and highlight some of these links that you can do to call out your local Congress. So we're going to jump to our next section, which is some more live questions that have come in from our audience. And this first question is to Yvette, and it is it already too late to do anything about the plastic crisis? And I guess an extension of that I'm always interested in is, from my own part of the question, is how do you find, how do you keep going when it feels like sometimes there are setbacks just as an individual within your advocacy and activism? And so again, the question is it already too late to do anything about the plastic crisis?
It's never too late to do something. It's never too late. And the thing is, we all have to act on this problem. It can't just be the advocates that everyone saw in the movie. It can't be just panelists here. The solution has to come from groundswell actions. So this is not a comfortable conversation. It's never comfortable to say, okay, this plastic bottle I've been using for shampoo has to be replaced. This is going to be uncomfortable to many, and that's okay. We have to accept that that's okay, because what's comfortable for us can be deadly and harmful to so many other communities. So it's never too late to reject that packaging. It's never too late to call out corporations and hold people accountable. And what keeps me going is that I have no option. I love my city. I love my state. I love the culture here. My family's been here for generations. And ultimately, I'm not going to move. That facility that's down the street from us in our communities is the one who has to, because as soon as we decide to move, another community is affected and impacted, and they simply grow larger and stronger. So it's never too late. And it's going to be uncomfortable, but you know what, folks? It's the truth, and we're acting on it.
That's right. Sometimes the truth is uncomfortable, as we know. I have a question that is especially for Kate and Yvette, which is, I wanted to, if you could please talk a bit about plastic in the COVID crisis. There's a big move in a number of places to, especially by the plastics industry, to encourage folks to use more disposables for health and safety reasons. Can you share a little insights? How should people treat that information? We'll do Kate first and then Yvette.
Thanks, Annie. Yeah, we've seen a huge resurgence of plastic during COVID, and we need to do what we can to keep employees safe when they're working in grocery stores and handling goods and items that they don't know where they've come from. But we've seen the plastics industry use this pandemic as an opportunity to further increase plastic usage, which is just awful that they're doing that. And so we need to make sure that the bans and the pauses on bans aren't permanent. That yes, we absolutely need to protect workers, and we can do our part to package our own groceries and put them in our own reusable bags and make sure that workers aren't handling anything that they don't feel safe handling. But we shouldn't be taking the advice of the plastics industry on our health and safety. And plastic is not inherently safer than any other material. And there's a lot of studies that have been out talking about different viruses and different coronaviruses and how long they last on surfaces. And plastic is, it lasts the longest on plastic. Some studies say 3 to 5 to 7 days, more so than other, reusable type of items. And so we're seeing the industry misuse science to further increase plastic usage. And we really need to push back against that, but also need to make sure that supermarket workers and health professionals are safe and that they are protected as well. That over to you.
Thanks so much for that question. And during the COVID crisis, it's easy to say that one single solution would be to add masks and have gloves. We've seen health professionals, we've seen the CDC come out and say, just wash your hands, and that can ultimately save lives. So we need to find out what is truth from what is disaster capitalism. What should we be watching out for as sales pitches to simply have us consume more of something that could be harmful to our health? Because as we know, plastic off gases during its whole lifetime. So the more plastic we have in our homes, the more deadly of an environment that we're creating as we're locking ourselves inside of our homes for days, if not months on end. So be conscious, like look into the products that you are consuming, aim for natural over anything else, glass, sometimes it's not a bad thing to go back to certain things that we were taught to use glass bottles and cans. And I just really want to say that the reason why disaster capitalism hits us when we're low is because it makes us believe that we are doing the right thing. And ultimately, that is their best sales pitch, to say that it is safe, that it is essential to keep it going. Oil and gas knows it's down, and with a flush of new generations and older ones understanding the impact and finally opening our eyes, they know they are losing a market. We saw fast fashion giants simply close their doors because more youth are becoming conscious, more consumers are being conscious. We are in an age of consciousness. We're asking the questions and getting the answers that we need, and we're questioning things that don't seem quite right. So this is disastrous. And for environmental justice communities, I really want to highlight the fact that for every set of gloves, for every mask, for every plastic bag, for every water bottle, folks, the water is all right now. For every water bottle, those bottles are getting simply sent, to incinerators next to vulnerable communities, and they're being just gassed off. So the same gases, the same oils, the same petrochemicals that were used to produce them are being unleashed in massive tons along frontline and fence line communities into populations that are already affected with upper respiratory issues and cancer clusters. But we know, like we said earlier, that's not the full impact. So let's act with consciousness, let's act with intent and a positive approach to things, knowing everything that we now know. Because once you know, you can't unlearn.
Thank you for those great answers, both of you. I think it's definitely an interesting time we're in that's breaking down systems that we didn't even realize existed, including our own, and how we can shift. And as we all are spending so much more time at home, you realize you're sold an idea that you need to buy something that you could probably make yourself. So I think it's like taking these lessons beyond this time. So the next question I have is from Zoom, from Abby, and she said, I'm in high school and I try to convince my peers to recycle and use less plastic, but they think it's trendy to use plastic and I can't change their minds. How do I convince them that plastic is an issue and is destroying our future? So anyone like to jump in and answer that question? Maybe Martin, because you're a plastics knowledge.
Yeah, we also have a retail store that provides all kinds of individual solutions for eliminating plastic in our life. It's sort of a plastic-free store. And when we put a lot of products in there, sometimes they don't catch on and people are like, what? Why do you have that? And we were one of the first stores to carry stainless steel clean canteens a decade or more ago before you could find them everywhere. And so it's hard to be a trendsetter. It's hard to get out there and sort of demonstrate. But I do think that modeling amongst your peers and just there are other ways to convince people besides just saying bad, 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 bad. So for example, in the Bay Area, we have amazing water. It comes straight from the Sierra Nevadas. It's better than any bottled water I've ever had. So why would I pay more than gasoline for water that's been sitting in a plastic bottle for months when I can get better tasting water and cleaner water and more tested water for basically for free out of my tap? I can also take this nice bottle lots of places. It's a much better experience. It's a much better thing to have than a crappy cheap plastic bottle. So there may be some other ways to kind of highlight the value of having your own bottle, or carrying your own bag, or bringing your own utensils. You know, I like to, we have this Plastic Free July effort in July every year where we try and get people to go 100% plastic free. It's really hard. I like to say, pick one thing that you can do every day, all the time, where your family's going to see it, your friends are going to see it, something visible. And, you know, if it's bottled water, that's a really easy place to go. But there are lots of others that you could pick, and just stick with it. And when people question you or ask you, just use that as an opportunity for a conversation starter. And they may not agree with you at first, but you know, eventually they start to see you and somebody else, and they see it on TV, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, maybe that's the cool thing now, as opposed to the water bottle being the cool, trendy thing.
Yeah, it's so true. I think often as well, trends you don't see, you know, happening. They're just, you can often take an action and find joy in that yourself. And sometimes just that joy can be infectious, and people can see that and decide to do it too, because it looks like you're having fun doing it regardless if they care about the impact of it. So I want to thank everyone for the great questions of coming in, and we'd love to pass it over to Yvette and Martin to talk about that. I think they have some information that they're going to share as slides that talk more about Tejas and the Berkeley Ecology Center. So I think I'm passing it over to Yvette first, who has a presentation that she'd like to share with us.
Yes, so first of all, this picture actually came from Greenpeace inviting us onto a Greenpeace helicopter after Hurricane Harvey. And this shot was just taken from my phone. What you see on the right, that's Manchester. Everything around it is refineries. There are over 3 massive petrochemical producers there, and a massive tank farm. This is what we're talking about when we talk environmental justice. People have this assumption that there are buffer zones that are 200, 300 feet away from these facilities. But in reality, we're talking about a church, a daycare, a hospital, a restaurant, your home, your family's home next to these facilities, which makes chemical disasters even more chaotic, because there's little to no way of escaping a massive disaster. But what we do at Tejas is simply provide the tools and advocacy approaches to help communities and frontline fence line communities and organizations help strategize a way to keep communities safe, whether that is through enforcement or regulations, preventing environmental rollback. We do crisis response during chemical disasters, shelter in place training, which literally means closing your windows, your doors, and covering them with plastic to protect us from the same facilities that are producing this plastic. So I did want to share that the House has been doing this for over a decade's worth of work out in the Gulf Coast. And we're not the only organization out there. Throughout the Gulf Coast, there are many wonderful organizations, including Rice, St. James, the Corpus Christi's For the Greater Good. Definitely look into the grassroots organizations in your backyard that can help and assist in making that change, because it's the bottom-up solution that really works. And that's why we thank, the Ecology Center and Greenpeace for incorporating us in the presentation, because we need to broach this work in an intersectional way that involves all of us as part of a conversation, including everyone who's listening right now. This is a dangerous precedent. This is what areas along the Ohio Valley and Appalachia could potentially look like if we don't reach mass mobilization. So again, approach the work that you do in any single way. And you don't have to be a professional advocate to do it. We have community members, seniors, young folks who come out and do small pieces or simply ask the questions sometimes or relay information. Those are the kind of approaches that we see at Tejas as being successful approaches. So like I said, we do advocacy, we do file federal lawsuits. We're part of over 7 federal lawsuits with oil and gas, a small organization of less than 4 people. So thank you for giving us the time to present. How folks can support. Yeah. How folks can support, go to www.tejasbarrios.org, visit our page, subscribe, and, feel free to reach out to us in any way.
Yeah, so the Ecology Center in Berkeley was founded in the run-up to the first Earth Day, and we're celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. The idea was that every community should have a place where people could come together and get active on local issues that have a broader impact. So we've been a global organization thinking globally and acting locally for 50 years. And there are lots of independent organizations like us around the country. There are dozens of ecology centers. I would just say, we are multi-issue. We do the curbside recycling. That was one of the things that simmered up from the community at that time in the 1970s, but we now also run farmers markets, and we have a youth engagement program and a demonstration home and a retail store. So there's lots of things that, where we felt a real strong community need, and then link that to things that have a much broader impact. So the Ecology Center also championed the nation's first soda tax. After many other communities had tried to pass them, we passed a soda tax in Berkeley to try and fight childhood obesity and the diabetes epidemic, and how that ties in with the bottling industry. We also passed the first disposable foodware reduction ordinance in the country. And this is something that can be passed in other communities. We hope that it would help to inform the debate and create a model for other communities. And it may not work everywhere, or maybe there's pieces of it that could work in your community. So check out our website, ecologycenter.org. We have a pretty strong regular Facebook feed if you want to check that out. We have great resources on our website. If you are in the area or in the region visiting or live nearby, please come into our store or visit our farmers markets. You can find all of that on the website. And finally, I would just say, we can't recycle our way out of this plastic pollution problem. We really do have to turn off the spigot, and recycling is not going to be the solution. So we need to support recycling and maintain recycling, but we also need to keep it real. And anything you can do at your local level to make sure that recycling is true and real and honest and transparent will help the industry and help the movement overall.
Great, thank you so much, Yvette and Martin, for that. I'm sure hopefully we can also share the links to both of your websites. I'd like to pass it over to Annie, who's going to share what we can all do after this call and our call to action as a collective.
Thank you so much, Bonnie, and thank you, Yvette and Martin. Those ideas were so great. I will tell you, I'm personally a member of the Ecology Center and a supporter of Tejas. If you are not, I really encourage that you all support them, as well as I hope you're members of Greenpeace. These are two of the best organizations in the country working on these issues. We're so honored to have you both here today. And Martin and Yvette both already shared a lot of really important ideas of things we can do, including it's so important to call your representatives, your member of Congress, your senators, and ask them to support the Environmental Justice for All Act and the Break Free from Plastic Act, which Yvette talked about both of those, and they will be, that information will be shared with all of you. It's so important to actually call your members of Congress. But there's one more very important thing that I want to talk about, a call to action where we can all make a difference. We need to do it really quickly, is that we talked about how the oil and gas industry is worried about its future because they know that climate concerns are such that we're not going to keep drilling and fracking forever. And they're banking on single-use plastic to continue their oil and gas drilling and fracking. So what they're doing right now, because they're in such a financial slump, is they're going to the government and they're saying that they have been hurt by COVID and that they need a multi-billion or perhaps even trillion-dollar bailout. This is money that should be spent right now to help people that are suffering because of COVID, to provide essential worker protections. This money that the government is spending right now on the COVID response and the economic stimulus, it should be a down payment on a healthier, cleaner, safer, more fair future. And instead, the fossil fuel companies are heavily lobbying the Trump administration for these bailouts. A few Fridays ago, Trump met with 7 fossil fuel executives. We don't know what happened in that room, but when he came out, Trump said that they left that room very happy. And that is alarming. The fossil fuel industries are in trouble, not because of COVID, but because the era of fossil fuels is over. And our tax dollars should not be spent propping up this industry that has lied to us, polluted to us, and is pushing us over the ecological cliff in terms of both climate crisis and single-use plastic. So what we need everybody to do as quickly as possible, because these decisions are being made right now in Congress, is to contact your elected representative and say no fossil fuel bailout, and instead use that money to support essential workers that are on the front lines of saving our lives and keeping our country functioning, and working households, support people to put food on their table, use that money to make a down payment on a better future. I know that's a lot of information. You don't have to remember it all. We will send you this information. To get it, just take your cell phone and text the word Congress to 877-877. Just put in that number, 877-877, text the word Congress. And when you do that, we will send you a link with all this information to help you contact your member of Congress. Remember, they work for you. You pay their salaries. They need to listen to you. And there's more of us than there are fossil fuel industries. So if we get ourselves organized and call our members of Congress, we can stop this fossil fuel bailout. So please do it yourself. And what I'm going to commit to do, and I hope all of you will, is I'm going to commit to get 10 friends and neighbors by Tuesday to do the same thing. Please do the same. Share on your social media, share in your church, in your schools, in your workplace. Tell them to text the word Congress to 877-877 and then make their voices heard, because it will be an outrage if the government takes our taxpayer money and uses it to prop up these corporations that are literally threatening our ability to live on this planet, rather than use that money where we need it right now for health and safety and justice. So thank you so much for taking action. It's so crucial. These decisions are being made in the coming days. Over to you, Linda.
Hi, everyone. And I can't thank you enough for joining us today. I can't believe it. 400 people have joined us on Zoom, on Facebook Live, and the more people that are going to get to see this video later. So a question that I have for you is, we have a poll. How did the call go? Let us know, be honest. If you have feedback, put it in the chat. Facebook, if you feel like chatting with us and letting us know how it went, put it in the chat as well. Not to toot my own horn, but it looks like it was amazing. 62%, that's good, it's going up. You should do it again. Yes, I totally agree. Awesome, I appreciate that. Great, if we can move on to the next slide. some key takeaways that we have for y'all is people, the climate and the planet are already drowning in plastic, and we have to stop the plastic industry's plans to almost triple plastic production by 2050. You learn facts about the petrochemicals, and as you know, we may be physically distancing at home, but the good fight continues, and we're going to continue doing that, right? We also have the Tejas Ask. It's going to be in the chat on Zoom and on Facebook. You're also going to receive a link to the Tejas Facebook page. And also to continue to get involved, text the keyword Congress to 877-877. Demand that Congress supports people in need and that corporate CEOs lining up for handouts. Once you receive that message, you'll get a call from us, and you'll be connected to a representative. Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Oh, sorry about that.
No,
I will
go on.
pass on back to Bonnie.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. I've sent my text. I hope you do as well. And I love Annie's idea of getting 10 friends to do so too. So I'll be doing that after the call as my action today. Thank you, Martin, Kate, and Yvette for joining, and Annie for moderating with me. It's been a real joy, and I really do hope you check out the film. It just really cleverly explains it, cleverly explains the whole world of plastic, and it's just really brilliantly made. So watch that after the call if you can. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Annie and Bonnie. Really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you. What a pleasure. Great to see you all. Go recruit some neighbors.
Yeah. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.